When I was around 7 or 8, my parents signed me and my twin brother up for a local summer day camp. It wasn't anything special, just a basic outdoor camp about 20 minutes from our house. My parents both worked full-time jobs, and the camp gave them a place to drop us off during the weekdays while they were at work. They'd pick us up around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. I remember the first few days feeling weird, like I didn't belong there. The place had this air of being half forgotten. Nothing was really taken care of, like it was stuck in time and slowly falling apart. The campgrounds were surrounded by thick woods on all sides. There were old, cracked tennis courts with weeds growing through the lines, a broken jungle gym where the slide had long since rusted, and picnic tables that were warped and splintering. The cabins where we stored our bags smelled like mildew. Some of the windows had been taped up instead of repaired. It always looked like it had rained the day before, even when it hadn't. Everything had this kind of wet, sticky, sour smell to it. The counselors were mostly teenagers, barely older than us in my eyes, and they didn't really care about what we were doing. A lot of them just sat in the shade talking to each other or looking at their phones. When kids fought or did something they shouldn't, they were barely disciplined. That meant the meaner kids pretty much had free rein to bully whoever they wanted, and they did. I wasn't popular. I was shy and quiet, and I didn't like loud noises or being made fun of. My brother was better at blending in, but he always looked out for me. The worst place was the changing rooms. There were 2 small buildings set a bit back from the main area, one for boys and one for girls. We had to change there into our bathing suits before swimming or playing in the lake. The girls' changing room was awful. The floor was sticky, and the lights overhead always flickered like they were about to go out. There was mold on the ceiling, and it smelled like wet socks and dirty mop water. But the worst thing about that room was the door that led out into the woods. It was an old wooden door near the back, tucked behind some changing stalls. The door didn't have a knob, just a hole where one used to be. That meant it was always unlocked, and you could see straight through the hole into the woods. The counselors told us to ignore it. They said no one ever came through it, and that it didn't lead anywhere important. Still, it made me feel uneasy every time I saw it. During group changes, someone would usually stand in front of the door while the rest of us changed, just in case one of the boys thought it would be funny to peek in. One day, I was the last one to change. I'd taken a bit longer finishing my snack, and by the time I got to the changing room, the rest of the girls had already gone ahead to the lake. There was no one else in the building. I remember how quiet it was, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of birds outside. I changed quickly, keeping my back to the door, but then I felt something. You know that feeling when someone is watching you? My skin went cold. I turned my head toward the door. Through the hole where the doorknob should have been, I saw an eye. Just one. Wide open, unblinking, staring directly at me. I couldn't see the rest of the face, just that eye, bloodshot and pressed close enough to the hole that it filled the opening completely. I froze for a second, and then I grabbed my clothes and yanked them back on over my swimsuit. My hands were shaking. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything. I just ran out of the building as fast as I could and didn't stop until I found my brother. I pulled him aside and told him what happened. He got serious right away, and we both went to tell one of the counselors. The counselor looked annoyed more than anything. He said maybe it was one of the boys playing a prank, but they didn't really do anything about it. No one followed up. No one asked me any more questions. It was brushed off like nothing happened. But that was the last day I changed alone. When I got home that night, I told my dad I didn't want to go back to the camp. He was already frustrated with the place. We'd complained about it before, said the kids were mean and it was boring. I think that night something finally clicked for him. He didn't ask too many questions, but he didn't force me to go back either. A few days later, he pulled both me and my brother out of the program. He told the camp we wouldn't be returning, and just like that, we were done with it. I didn't think much about it for years. I pushed that summer to the back of my mind, like a bad dream that didn't feel real anymore. I never liked talking about it, and I never wanted to see that camp again. Eventually, it closed down. We drove past it sometimes on our way to other places. The gates were chained up. The signs were faded. Nature started to take it back. Trees pushed through the tennis courts. The roof sagged. The place looked dead. I was in my 20s when I finally brought it up again. We were at my parents' house for dinner, and somehow the conversation drifted to childhood memories. We started talking about old schools, old friends, old trips. I mentioned the camp without thinking too much about it. Just a passing comment about how creepy that place was. My dad got quiet. He looked down at his plate, and I remember the air changing in the room. It was like the temperature dropped. I asked him if he ever found out what happened to that place, why it shut down. He sighed, and then he told me. A few weeks after he pulled us out, something awful happened. A 13-year-old boy assaulted a 7-year-old girl in the woods right behind the girls' changing room. The same building with the door that never locked. The same woods I saw the eye staring from. The boy had been in the camp. He wasn't a counselor, just one of the older kids. It had happened during free time, when everyone was supposed to be playing or swimming. The counselors didn't notice she was missing until it was too late. The police got involved. There was an investigation. Parents were furious. Some of the staff were fired. Others left on their own. The camp tried to stay open for another summer, but not enough people signed up. Eventually, the place was shut down for good. My dad told me he never wanted to tell me back then. I was too young. He didn't want me to carry that with me. But he said that when I told him about someone watching me change, about the eye at the door, he felt sick. He said he kept thinking, what if he hadn't listened? What if he had made us stay a few more weeks? I didn't sleep well that night. I kept seeing that horrible red-ringed eye staring through the hole. I kept thinking about the little girl. I didn't know her name. I didn't know if she was okay. But I thought about her and what she went through. I thought about how close I might have come to being in her place. I thought about how lucky I was that my brother believed me, that my dad took me seriously. As I got older, I kept revisiting that summer in my mind. Not just the eye or the woods, but the way adults sometimes ignored things they didn't want to deal with. The counselors who didn't care. The broken door that was never fixed. The way other kids could be cruel when they knew no one was watching. That summer taught me something I didn't understand until much later. Danger doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's standing just outside a broken door. I never went near that place again. Even when it was just a ruin, even when the buildings had collapsed and the woods had swallowed the trails. I couldn't bring myself to see it. I didn't want to remember the smell of that room, or the sound of the lights buzzing overhead, or the feeling of my skin crawling under someone's gaze. But I remembered it all anyway. Years later, I learned that the property had been bought up by someone looking to build homes there. They cleared the trees and tore down what was left of the buildings. Now, it's a neighborhood with cul-de-sacs and mailboxes and porch lights. Sometimes I wonder if the families living there know what used to be in that spot. If the ground remembers. If the trees remember. I never told many people this story. It didn't feel like something that needed sharing until I was much older. But now I tell it because I think about how easy it is to ignore what doesn't seem important. A missing doorknob. A quiet kid who doesn't want to go back to camp. Parent who almost didn't listen. That summer was a turning point I didn't recognize until long after it had passed. It made me more cautious. It made me more aware. It made me trust my instincts, even when I couldn't explain them. And maybe most of all, it taught me how important it is to believe kids when they say something feels wrong. Because sometimes it is. It was late September, that weird in-between time when summer's heat still lingers during the day, but the nights bite sharp like winter's coming early. Me and my buddy, Kyle, decided to take our 4X4S and head up into the mountains for a weekend camping trip. We both had been working like dogs, and we needed out. Away from cell towers, away from asphalt, away from people. Just dirt trails, pine trees, cold beers, and the hum of the engine under you as you crawl up some steep switchback. We didn't pick a marked campsite or anything like that. That's not how we roll. We drove up into the mountains past the usual fire roads, took a couple turns that weren't on most GPS apps, and found a little flat spot near the edge of a ridgeline. You could see all the way out across the valley from that point. No light pollution, no towns below. Just black space with faint outlines of ridges and forested slopes. We parked the trucks facing outward and set up camp behind them in the trees a bit, maybe 15 or 20 yards in, just enough cover to break the wind. The spot was perfect. Cold enough at night that the bugs didn't harass us, and quiet, dead quiet. That kind of silence you only get in places where the nearest human being is probably miles away. Not even the wind made noise unless it was strong enough to sway the taller pines, and even then, it was just a slow, low rush. The kind of sound that makes you feel like you're the only thing alive for miles. We spent the day riding trails, eating jerky, and cracking jokes that wouldn't make sense outside the cab of a truck. We grilled some sausages on the little propane stove and drank a couple beers by the fire until it got too cold to sit around. Then we crashed in our tents around 11 or so. I had my own small two-man tent a few feet away from Kyle's. The fire was mostly embers by then, the night sky bright with stars like dust spilled across black glass. Felt good, safe even, but sometime in the night, had to be around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up with that familiar pressure in my bladder. I tried to ignore it, told myself to just roll over and fall back asleep. But it wasn't going anywhere, and the cold didn't help. So eventually I groaned, unzipped my sleeping bag, slipped into my boots, and put on my fleece and headlamp. The light cut through the dark in a tight cone, catching little flecks in the air. Maybe dust, maybe mist. The cold had settled deep by then, the kind that bites your nose and stiffens your fingers in seconds. I didn't want to just step outside the tent and go there. I could hear Kyle snoring faintly in his tent nearby, and the last thing I needed was him making some crack the next morning about how I pissed right by the camp. So I walked a bit further out, past the ring of light from the fire embers, a little ways down the slight slope leading away from camp. Maybe 25 or 30 feet away. Not far, but just enough to feel like I had privacy. The ground was loose with rocks and pine needles. I found a flat enough patch to do my business and just stared out into the woods while I went. My breath hung in the air in front of me, puffing out in little clouds. My headlamp was the only light. No moon that night, just stars above like distant frost on black velvet. About halfway through, I heard it. Rocks shifting behind me, not crashing, not sliding, just the soft, unmistakable sound of movement. Something stepping carefully, deliberately over loose stone. I froze. My stomach twisted up instantly, and my ears started ringing the way they do when your body floods with adrenaline. The sound wasn't close, maybe 15 feet behind me, but it wasn't far, either. I was exposed, pants halfway down, standing out there like a fool with my back turned to God knows what. My first thought was bear, or worse, a mountain lion. I didn't carry my sidearm when I stepped out because I figured I'd only be out for a minute. Big mistake. I clenched up, zipped as fast as I could without making noise, and slowly turned around with the headlamp shining where I'd come from. The beam caught some rocks, some brush, the trees. First, nothing. Just silence again. The kind of silence that doesn't feel natural, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them. They reflected the light back at me in that weird greenish-white glow. Not human eyes, not like in the movies. These were small, sharp, set wide apart. 20, maybe more, just hanging there in the dark, low to the ground, still. Couldn't move. My whole body just locked up. It was like every primal instinct I'd ever had came online all at once and screamed freeze. My breathing stopped. I didn't even blink. It felt like a wire was drawn tight through my chest, and if I moved even a hair, it would snap. The eyes didn't come closer. They didn't move at all, just stared, like they were trying to figure out what I was, like I had stepped into their world without an invite. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been a full minute. Time didn't move right in that moment. It was just me, the cold, the dark, and those eyes. And then I heard it. Ma triple A. Soft, nasal, almost pitiful sounding. A goat bleat. Another followed. Then another. And just like that, the tension snapped. Mountain goats. It was a fucking herd of mountain goats. I exhaled hard and nearly collapsed from the release of tension. My legs were shaking like I just run a sprint. My fingers tingled with pins and needles. The goats didn't move much, just blinked and occasionally shifted their hooves. One of them stepped forward into the edge of my headlamp's beam, and I saw its shape clearly: thick fur, curved horns, big rectangular pupils. I don't know what the hell they were doing out there in the middle of the night. Maybe they were foraging. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they'd heard me and come to see what the noise was. Either way, they had me on the verge of a damn aneurysm. I backed away slow, still shaking, still lightheaded. When I got back to camp, I stood by the fire pit and took a few long breaths. I could still hear the faint ma triple echoing through the trees like some haunted barnyard noise. I poked at the coals with a stick until they flared up enough to cast a bit more light, then sat on the cooler just to calm down. Eventually, I crawled back into my tent, still fully dressed, and zipped it up tight. Took me a long time to fall asleep again. Every twig snap outside made my ears perk. I kept seeing those eyes in the dark every time I closed mine. Not out of fear anymore, but just from how raw the moment had been. It burned into my mind like a photo flash. The next morning, Kyle came stumbling out of his tent yawning and stretching. I didn't say much right away, just nodded, poured myself some instant coffee, and leaned back against the bumper of my truck, still staring out toward the woods where I'd been the night before. When I finally told him what happened, he just laughed and shook his head. "You're lucky it wasn't a cougar," he said, sipping his coffee. "You'd have been pissing yourself for real." We packed up camp after breakfast, still joking about my goat encounter. But something about the whole thing stuck with me. I've seen wildlife before. Bears, coyotes, even a wolf once while hiking in Alaska, but nothing ever felt quite like that. It wasn't the goats. It was the moment before I knew what they were. That split second of pure animal fear. The deep, ancient part of the brain that doesn't use words. Just feelings. Just run or freeze. I realized something that night. When you're that far out, when the fire dies down and the cold creeps in, you're not at the top of the food chain anymore. You're just another warm body in the woods. And the woods don't care if you're carrying a flashlight or driving a $$60,000 truck. You're in their house. And sometimes, even when it turns out to be nothing, that house reminds you exactly where you stand. When I was really young, probably around 7 or 8, we went on this family trip to a lake up north. I don't remember the exact name of the place, but it was one of those quiet lakes with cabins scattered around the shore. Some private docks, thick woods behind every cabin, and not many people around. It was late summer, maybe early fall. The air was warm in the day, cooler at night, and the trees had just started to change color. I remember the smell of pine and old leaves, the sound of birds in the morning and frogs at night. It was the kind of place where the water was so still in the early hours that you could see every branch and cloud reflected perfectly on the surface. We were staying in a small cabin my parents had rented for the week. It was basic. 2 small bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace, and a screened porch that looked out onto the lake. There was a little wooden dock out front, just big enough for a rowboat to tie off and for a couple of chairs at the end where my dad liked to sit and fish. He always brought his old tackle box, full of tangled lines and rusty hooks, and spent hours just sitting out there. My mom stayed closer to the cabin, reading, cooking, or making sure my little sister didn't wander off into the woods. My older brother and I had more freedom. He was around 12, and to me, he seemed fearless. He knew how to row the boat, light a fire, even gut a fish. I followed him everywhere. Whatever he wanted to do, I did too. That trip, we spent most of our time swimming, skipping stones, and exploring the trails behind the cabin. But the thing we loved most was taking the rowboat out on the lake. My dad had shown my brother how to handle it, and after the first day, we were allowed to take it out by ourselves, as long as we stayed where they could see us from the dock. One morning, after breakfast, my mom pointed out something in the water, maybe 30 or 40 yards from the shore. It was this large round thing floating on the surface, mostly black with some faded red or orange on it. From a distance, it looked like a buoy, one of those markers they put out to warn boats about rocks or sudden drop-offs. She told us not to go near it. She wasn't panicked or anything, just gave us a quick warning before going back inside. My dad was still messing with his fishing gear and didn't even look up. My brother and I just nodded and said okay. But of course, being kids, that only made us more curious. We waited until my dad sat down with his line in the water, and then we slipped into the boat, untied it, and started rowing out toward the floating thing. The lake was calm, with only a few ripples from our oars and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. I remember the way the sun hit the water, making everything too bright to look at directly. I had to squint most of the way. As we got closer, we noticed something strange. The thing wasn't shaped like the buoys we'd seen before. It wasn't solid all the way through, and it moved differently with the water. It wasn't bobbing with a kind of springiness like a plastic or metal buoy would. It rolled slightly, almost lazily, like it was heavy on one side. The closer we got, the quieter we got. My brother had stopped rowing, and we were just drifting toward it. Neither of us said anything, but I think we both knew something was off. It was when we got within maybe 10 feet that the smell hit us. I still remember it. It wasn't just bad, it was thick, like it coated the inside of your nose and throat. It smelled like rotting fish, dirty water, and something worse underneath it all. I started gagging right away, and my brother covered his nose with his shirt. That's when I realized what we were looking at. It wasn't a buoy. It was a body, bloated, black in places, skin stretched tight and shiny like old leather. The arms and legs weren't visible, maybe tucked under or tangled up somehow, but the face, or what was left of it, was tilted just above the surface. The eyes were gone, the mouth gaping. Hair floated in a stringy mess around what had once been a head. There were pieces of clothing still clinging to it. Something bright red, maybe a swimsuit or a shirt, faded and torn. My brother started yelling. He turned the boat around so fast I almost fell out. I was crying without even realizing it, curled up at the bottom of the boat while he rowed like mad back toward the dock. My mom saw us coming and ran down to meet us. I think she knew right away something was wrong. My brother was white as a sheet, shaking, couldn't even talk. We just pointed. Later that day, the police came. A boat with 2 officers arrived and went straight to where we'd pointed. They confirmed it was a body, and not just any body, but one of the tourists that had gone missing the previous week. I remember hearing about it on the radio once before our trip. A group of people, 3 or 4 I think, had gone out kayaking or canoeing and never came back. They'd found one of the boats washed up on the far side of the lake, but no sign of the people. Until now. That night I couldn't sleep. I just lay in the bunk bed with the covers up to my chin. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside making me jump. My parents tried to keep things normal. They cooked dinner, played cards, talked in low voices. But the mood had changed. We all felt it. The next day we packed up earlier than planned. My dad said something about work and needing to get back, but we all knew it was because of what we'd seen. We didn't talk much on the drive home. My brother stared out the window most of the way. I kept thinking about how close we'd been, how if the wind had pushed the boat a little faster, I might have touched it. Over the next few days, we learned more from the news. They said the man we found had likely drowned after the group ran into trouble during a storm that had hit the lake unexpectedly. He'd been in the water for days, maybe caught in some reeds or stuck against something before finally drifting loose and floating to where we found him. They never found the others. A woman, her teenage son, and another man. All of them vanished. The authorities searched for days after recovering the body. Drones, divers, helicopters, but nothing else ever surfaced. They were just gone. I don't think my parents ever fully understood how much that moment stuck with me. It changed the way I saw lakes, forests, even the idea of family vacations. There was something about that kind of stillness, something so quiet it made you hear your own heartbeat, and the idea that something so awful could be hidden just beneath the surface, right there where we'd been swimming the day before. I didn't go back to that lake, and we didn't rent cabins like that again. The next year we went to the beach instead, where the crowds made it feel safer, even though I knew that was just an illusion. My brother eventually talked about it with his friends, turning it into one of those crazy stories you tell to impress people. But for me, it wasn't something to brag about. It was a moment frozen in my mind. The weight of it, the smell, the way the water looked around the body, dark and oily in the sunlight. Now that I'm older, I think about that trip sometimes. Not just the horror of what we found, but the things we didn't find. the others who disappeared, where they might have ended up, whether their families ever found peace. I imagine being one of them, caught in a storm, the canoe flipping, no land in sight, the cold pulling at your limbs, the silence when the shouting stops. It's terrifying because it's real. There's no ghost story there, no monster, just nature and bad luck. I looked up the lake again recently. I found it on a map, traced the shoreline, even checked some local news archives. The case is still open, technically. No one was ever charged. Nothing suspicious was found beyond the accident. Just another sad story in a long list of outdoor tragedies. There's even a little plaque near one of the hiking trails now, in memory of the missing. I saw a picture of it online. Someone had left flowers next to it. Faded plastic ones, but still, it meant someone remembered. I don't go boating anymore. I'll swim in a pool, walk by a river, even fish from a pier, but I won't sit in a boat in the middle of a lake. Not again. And I never ignore those gut feelings anymore. When something feels wrong, I leave. No questions, no curiosity. I think a lot of people lose that instinct as they get older. They talk themselves out of fear, make excuses. But I trust that fear now. I learned the hard way that it's there for a reason. Sometimes the scariest things aren't hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're floating in plain sight, waiting for someone to come close. A little over 18 years ago, I had just gotten out of the military. It felt strange, like a part of me had been left behind somewhere between my last base and the stretch of road that took me out of Louisiana. I wasn't in a rush, but I was eager to get moving. I packed everything I had into my old green two-door Chevy and pointed it north toward Montana, my hometown. I hadn't been back in a few years. It was one of those quiet places where time seemed to fold over on itself, where things didn't really change, not in the ways that mattered. The drive up went smoothly. It was early February, still deep winter, and I was lucky with the weather. Roads were mostly clear, and the sky, though often gray, stayed steady and quiet. I took my time, stopped when I needed, and tried not to think too hard. The routine helped settle the transition in my head. No more uniforms, no more check-ins, no more orders. Just me, my thoughts, and the road. I spent a few days in Montana, seeing old friends, checking in with family, and letting the cold get into my bones the way it always did back home. But I had a new destination, Boise, Idaho. That's where I'd decided to plant roots, start fresh. I didn't have a job lined up yet, but I had enough saved to give myself some breathing room. When it came time to hit the road again, I made a decision based on the season. Instead of driving down through the middle of Idaho, through all those winding, dangerous mountain passes, I figured I'd cut across the Panhandle, take I-90 through Coeur d'Alene, and slip into Washington before heading south toward Boise. It was safer that way, or at least that's what I told myself. I remember that Sunday morning clearly. It was cold, real cold. The kind that sits in the bones, even with the heater blowing hard. I had been on the road since before dawn. The sun hadn't quite come up yet, and the sky was just starting to brighten in that way it does when it's overcast and the light diffuses evenly through the fog. And there was fog, thick, slow-moving fog that clung to the hills and swallowed up the distance like a tide. It pressed up against the windows of my Chevy, blurring the edges of everything. I'd been driving for a while and nature started calling. Normally, I would have just pulled off onto the shoulder, stepped out, and done my business behind the car. But the fog made that feel wrong somehow. It was thick enough that I couldn't see more than a couple dozen feet ahead, and something about that made me uneasy. I figured I'd wait until the next town. Shouldn't be too far, I thought. After another 5 miles or so, I started seeing signs for a town. I can't remember the exact name. I want to say it was Linder or Linden or something close to that. The signs looked weathered, but they were visible. I turned off the interstate when I saw the exit. Just a right-hand turn off I-90 onto a narrow 2-lane road that dipped into a small valley. The trees lining the road were mostly bare, their dark limbs poking out of the fog like skeletal fingers. I drove slow. The fog had only thickened since I left the interstate. I kept expecting it to clear once I got lower, but it didn't. Instead, the silence grew. My tires hummed on the pavement, but that was the only sound. No birds, no wind, just the steady hum of rubber on road and the soft hiss of the heater inside my car. The town came into view suddenly, just sort of emerged out of the gray. Small buildings, most of them single-story. A couple of them had false fronts like old Western stores. There was a post office, or what looked like one, and a diner with a rusted sign out front. There were cars parked along the main drag, a few trucks too, older models mostly. But no people, none. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was early, after all, and small towns don't always wake up fast. But the stillness was too complete. Not even a dog barking or a crow calling. I rolled down the window a crack to listen. Nothing. Not even the faint buzz of a transformer or the creak of a weather vane. I pulled up to a gas station on the corner. It was one of those old-style places that did repairs as well. The kind with grimy garage bays, tool chests pushed up against the walls, and faded advertisements for spark plugs and oil changes. The lights inside were on. That's what struck me first. The inside lights, the ones above the counter, were glowing yellow behind the windows, and the sign outside blinked on and off. Open. I parked in front and got out, the cold hitting me full in the face. I stepped inside. It smelled like oil and old rubber. I expected to hear the ding of a bell over the door, but there was nothing. The front counter was empty. A small stool sat behind it, a crumpled receipt on top of the register. Behind the counter were racks of motor oil, some dusty, some new, but no one. I called out once, just a simple hello. My voice echoed strangely. It bounced off the walls, absorbed too quickly, as if the place swallowed sound. I stood there for a few seconds, shifting from foot to foot, then decided to check around back for a bathroom. The bathroom door was on the side of the building. I tried the knob. Locked. I knocked once. No answer. I started walking back toward the front when I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. There, in the middle of the street, was a delivery truck. Coke truck. One of the big ones with the red paint and white lettering. Its headlights were on, fog lights too, casting wide yellow beams into the mist. The hazard lights blinked steadily. Both the passenger and driver's side doors were open, hanging wide like wings, but no one was inside. I just stood there for a moment watching the lights blink. There was a faint ticking sound coming from the engine, cooling metal or something like that, but the truck wasn't running. I looked up and down the street. Nothing moved. Not a single curtain twitched in the windows. Not a car engine started. The fog clung to everything like static. My gut clenched. Something was off. Really off. I got back in my car without checking the bathroom again. I didn't even look back at the gas station. I pulled out slow, trying not to spin the tires, and drove back the way I came. The trees on either side of the road felt closer now, like they were leaning in. I merged back onto I-90 and didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Spokane. Somewhere between that strange town and the city, I realized I didn't need to piss anymore. I'd forgotten about it completely. My hands were cold on the wheel, knuckles white from how hard I was gripping it. When I stopped at a diner outside Spokane, I pulled out the old Rand McNally map I kept in the glove box, spread it out on the table next to my coffee, and tried to find the turn off the town. Anything. But there was nothing. No Linder, no Linden, no exit matching the one I took. I traced the highway 3 times, double-checked road numbers and intersections. Nothing fit. I thought maybe I'd misread the sign. Maybe the name was something else entirely. But the memory was fresh, too fresh, and I remembered what I saw. The cars, the buildings, the Coke truck with the doors flung open like someone had stepped out and vanished into the fog. When I got to Boise, I told my buddy about it. He laughed and said it sounded like a bad video game plot. I didn't blame him. It did sound like that. It sounded made up. But I wasn't trying to make anyone believe anything. I wasn't selling a story. I just wanted someone to say, "Yeah, I've seen that place too." But no one ever did. Years went by. Every once in a while, I'd think about that morning, about the fog and the silence and the strange emptiness of it all. I looked for the town again a few times, on road trips, random map searches, even Street View on Google Maps. Nothing ever matched. It was like the place had never existed. Or maybe it had, and something had happened to it. Something that made it disappear. Now I'm almost 37. I've got a good job, a small place just outside Boise, and a little more peace in my life. But every once in a while, especially on cold, foggy mornings when the road is quiet, I think about that town, about how it felt like stepping into a painting where everything had frozen a moment before I arrived. And this weekend, with a few days off, I think I might head north, just to see. Maybe I'll find it again. Maybe I won't. Maybe it was never real to begin with. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That silence, that stillness, it wasn't right. And I need to know if it's still there. If I go back and it's gone, just open woods and highway, maybe that'll be enough. Maybe I can finally let it go. But if I find it again, if the fog is there and the Coke truck is still sitting in the street with its doors open, I don't know. I really don't. But I think it's time I found out. We were still kids, really. 17, maybe 18. It was late summer, early 90s, and a group of us had decided to go hiking in the Carpathians, up in the mountains of Transylvania. We were a tight group from school, me, Doru, Cataline, Irina, and Soren. We'd been planning the hike for a couple of weeks. Thought it'd be a good way to end the summer before the school year started. It was supposed to be a 2-day hike, just out and back. The mountains were beautiful, untouched, the kind of place where the forest is so thick you can't see the sky in some places. We packed light, sleeping bags, food, basic gear, just enough to keep us safe if we had to spend the night outside. There was a narrow trail that wound through the trees and up into the hills, and we were following that, hoping to make a ridge by sunset. After the first few hours, the trail got rougher. Pine needles were slick underfoot, and we had to stop every now and then to check our map. GPS didn't exist, of course, and none of us had even the thought of a mobile phone. You just relied on your eyes, your compass, and whoever had the best sense of direction. I usually did, but even I was starting to feel like we were pushing deeper into a place where people hadn't walked in a while. We'd been hiking for maybe 12, 13 kilometers, probably around 6 or 7 hours in. The trail started to level out a bit as we came over a low ridge. That's when we saw it. A house. Not a cabin or a shelter, a proper house made of old gray wood with a shingled roof and small windows. Beside it, there was a barn and a shed, and even a small pen where a couple of cows stood. Chickens pecked around near the barn door. The whole place looked like it had grown out of the ground itself. There was no road, no trail leading to it, nothing but trees all around. It was nestled in a clearing like something that shouldn't be there. At first, we thought we were just tired, maybe imagining things. But as we got closer, we saw smoke coming from the chimney. There was a garden behind the house, overgrown but still clearly being used. Potatoes maybe, some tall plants that could have been corn. Then we saw the people. There were 6 of them outside. 1 man and 5 women. The guy was older, maybe in his 50s or 60s. He had a thick beard, wiry gray hair, and was wearing some kind of rough homemade shirt and pants that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. The women were younger, maybe anywhere from their 20s to 40s, all in long skirts and sweaters, simple clothes. They stood apart from him, behind the fence near the barn, watching us without moving. The man came toward us, slowly, kind of stiff. His face looked worn out, like someone who hadn't had much sleep in years. His eyes were weird, dull, not vacant exactly, but like he wasn't used to making eye contact. He said something in Romanian, but it was off. Thick accent, words slurred or strange. We all spoke Romanian, obviously, but we could barely understand him. It was like he hadn't talked to anyone outside that group in years. He said something about the weather, then asked us who the president was. That caught us off guard. He repeated the question, "Who's the president now?" That made something go cold in my stomach. Doru answered him with Iliescu's name, and the man just nodded slowly, like he was trying to store the information for later. He asked us if we wanted some milk, pointed to the cow, then made a drinking motion. None of the women had moved. They just stood there watching. We were polite, said no, thank you, smiled, tried not to show how uneasy we were. But something was off, very off. The way they looked at us, especially the women, was wrong. Not scared, but almost like they were being kept in check. None of them came closer. They didn't speak. Their eyes kept flicking to the man, then back to us. One of them looked at our shoes. Doru had bright blue running shoes and tilted her head like she'd never seen that kind of color before. The whole place was too quiet. No dogs barking, no kids playing, not even the usual sounds of life in the woods. Just the wind in the trees and the low clucking of the chickens. Felt frozen. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just talking in broken sentences with the guy, pretending to be interested in the farm, asking vague questions about the trail ahead. But there wasn't a trail ahead. That's the thing, his house was the end of the trail. The rest was just thick forest. We started wondering how they even got supplies. How did they get here in the first place? How did they survive the winters? It started getting worse the longer we stood there. The man's smile, if you could even call it that, twitched at the corners. He kept glancing behind us, like expecting someone else to show up. We started feeling like we were being measured, sized up. Soren said we should get moving soon, something about the light. The guy nodded again, didn't protest. But when we turned to leave, I could feel his eyes on our backs. I didn't want to turn around, but I did. He was still standing there, watching us. We didn't say a word for a while after we left the clearing. Just walked in silence, single file. None of us said what we were all thinking, not right away. But then Irina said it. "That wasn't right," she whispered. We all agreed. There was something off about the way they lived. It wasn't just that they didn't have power or gas. It was like they didn't want it, like they had cut themselves off from the world on purpose. After we were out of sight of the house, we started moving faster. At first, just a quick pace, then we broke into a run. Full sprint down the trail, packs bouncing on our backs, branches hitting our faces. We didn't stop until we hit a stream maybe a kilometer away. We splashed water on our faces, caught our breath, but the fear didn't go away. Soren kept looking over his shoulder. Irina was crying a little. We decided we weren't going to make it to the ridge that night. None of us wanted to keep hiking in the dark, especially not after that. We hiked another couple of hours until we found a good spot to camp. Flat ground, some cover, but with a good view of the trail. We made a fire, not a big one, just enough for light. We ate some bread, cheese, dried meat. Didn't talk much. That night, we took turns staying awake. One person always keeping watch. It wasn't something we'd planned ahead, but we didn't even have to discuss it. We just knew we couldn't all fall asleep at once. The forest felt different that night. Usually, you can hear owls, bugs, the rustling of small animals, but it was dead quiet, like the whole place was holding its breath. I was on the second shift, maybe around 2 in the morning. I sat there by the fire, listening, watching the dark shapes of the trees. Every now and then I'd hear a twig snap, or maybe imagine one. I couldn't stop thinking about the women, the way they stood so still, the way they didn't talk. Next morning, we packed up early. Didn't even eat, just wanted to get out of there. We followed the trail back, fast and focused. No one made jokes. No one lagged behind. When we finally got down to the village at the base of the mountain, we told a couple of the locals what we'd seen. Described the house, the people, where it was. They looked at us like we were nuts. One older guy, probably in his 70s, just shook his head and said nobody lived up there. Not for decades. He said there used to be some old shepherds that lived rough, but even they had moved down years ago. That part of the mountain was supposed to be empty. We tried to explain, said we saw it with our own eyes. The animals, the house, the people. The guy just laughed and said maybe we were tired, maybe we mistook a hunting cabin or some old ruins. But we hadn't. We knew what we saw. We asked around some more, but nobody believed us. Or maybe they didn't want to. Either way, we dropped it. We got on the bus back to town the next day and never spoke of it again in public. Among ourselves, we talked a bit in the weeks after, but even that faded. Years later, I went back to that region, drove through the same villages, looked up at those same mountains. I didn't hike back up. I couldn't bring myself to, but I asked around again, this time older, more careful. Still, nobody said they knew of anyone living up there. Still the same shrugs, the same stories about the mountain being empty. But we knew. We had been there. We saw the man, the women, the house, the barn. We smelled the smoke from the chimney. We heard the chickens. That place existed. I don't know who they were. Maybe some forgotten family that chose isolation. Maybe they were hiding from something. Or maybe they just didn't want the world to find them again. But they were there. And what scared me the most wasn't that they were different. It was how invisible they were. How you could walk past that ridge 100 times and never know there was life just over the hill. How easy it is to vanish and how many people might already have. It was almost 2:30 in the morning when I finally left work. I was exhausted. My back ached from sitting too long. My eyes burned from staring at a screen, and my hands still smelled faintly of old coffee and printer ink. I'd stayed way later than usual, fixing some last-minute emergency with reports that had to be ready by morning. Everyone else had cleared out by 10, maybe earlier. Even security had been gone when I walked through the empty lobby. The lights already dimmed like the place was trying to close up and forget I existed. My car was the only one left in the lot. I remember how quiet it was when I got in. No wind, no bugs, not even the hum of a distant truck. Just me and the silence. I lived way out of town, on a stretch of back road that only made sense to people who didn't mind driving 30 minutes through thick woods and farmland to get to a grocery store. I liked it most days. It was peaceful, felt far away from all the noise and mess of town life. But that night, as I pulled onto the highway and then onto the long, winding back road that led home, the isolation felt different. Everything was pitch black. My headlights were the only thing cutting through the dark, revealing nothing but trees, gravel, and the occasional reflector nailed to an old fence post. It was one of those nights where the sky looks like tar and the stars are nowhere to be seen. The kind of dark where your brain starts filling in shapes between the trees if you let it. I was maybe a mile from home, thinking about the leftovers in my fridge and how fast I could crawl into bed, when it happened. One moment the road was clear, and the next, a figure exploded out of the trees. She came from the right side of the road, sprinting full speed and waving her arms, screaming something I couldn't make out through the closed windows. She was covered in blood head to toe. Not dripping, but smeared, dried in streaks down her arms and legs, across her shirt and face. I slammed the brakes but swerved too, jerking the wheel hard to the left to avoid hitting her. The tires screamed. My heart nearly stopped. The car fishtailed a little on the gravel shoulder before I managed to correct it and come to a stop maybe 50 feet down the road. I sat there for a second, frozen, watching her in my rearview mirror. She hadn't moved. She just stood there in the middle of the road, her whole body shaking, her hands on her knees like she was trying to breathe. Everything in me wanted to keep going. Just get home, lock the door, forget I ever saw anything. But I couldn't. I kept thinking if that was someone I loved, bleeding and screaming in the woods, I'd want someone to help them. So I threw the car in reverse and backed up slowly. She didn't run when I pulled up beside her. She staggered over and yanked open the passenger side door. I flinched, but she collapsed into the seat, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands were shaking so bad I could hear her fingernails tapping against the dashboard. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't say anything. I just pulled out my phone and called the police with one hand while shifting into drive with the other. I told them I was taking a young woman to the hospital, that she was injured and said her boyfriend was after her, that he was somewhere in the woods near where I'd picked her up. They wanted me to stay put, to wait for officers to meet us. I told them there was no way I was sitting on the side of the road waiting for a man who might have a weapon and a head full of rage to show up. I told them I'd be at the hospital. They didn't argue. I drove fast, way faster than I usually would on those roads, but I kept control. The woman beside me wasn't saying anything, but I could hear her trying to catch her breath. Every now and then she let out this broken, quiet sob like she was holding everything in so it wouldn't explode. I didn't want to look at her too long, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to make her feel like she was being watched. She'd already had too much of that, I was sure. The blood looked fresh in places and older in others. Some of it looked like it had dried on her shirt, but her legs were streaked with newer smears, probably from cuts or scrapes as she ran. Her bare feet were filthy and bleeding, toes swollen and red. She had a bruise forming under one eye, and the skin along her left arm was puffy and scraped raw. She held herself like everything hurt. The drive to the hospital took about 25 minutes. Every few seconds I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to come flying out of the dark behind us. But there was nothing, just trees and more trees. I thought about turning on the radio, saying something, doing anything to break the tension, but I didn't. It felt wrong to fill the silence with anything but the engine and the road. When we got to the hospital, there were 2 police cruisers already waiting near the emergency entrance. I pulled right up to the doors and parked with the engine still running. The officers approached fast but calm, like they didn't want to scare her. I told them everything I could, where I found her, what she said about her boyfriend, where he might be. I gave them my number, my address, anything they needed. Then I stepped aside and let the medics take over. She didn't say anything to me. She didn't have to. I stood there watching her get lifted into a wheelchair, her head bowed low, her arms shaking. One of the nurses had a blanket around her shoulders. The doors closed behind her, and just like that, she was gone. I gave a full statement to the officers. They asked the usual questions: time, location, description. I told them I didn't know much about her or the guy. She hadn't given me any names, just said he was chasing her and that he'd hurt her. They thanked me, said I probably saved her life. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt tired. I drove home with the windows down, trying to get the smell of blood out of the car. I didn't go straight to bed when I got home. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the blank TV screen, running it all through my head again and again. The way she jumped out of the woods, the way her body trembled in my passenger seat, the fear in her eyes, stayed with me. A couple days later, the police called. They'd found the guy about 6 hours after everything happened. He tried to get out of the woods and hitch a ride back toward town, but someone recognized his description from the emergency bulletin and called it in. He was arrested without a fight. The officer didn't give me too many details, but he said the guy had a record: assault, domestic violence, drugs. The woman had gotten a restraining order filed as soon as she was out of the hospital. I asked if she was okay. He said she'd been treated for a concussion, broken ribs, and a couple deep cuts on her legs, but she was going to recover. She was staying with family out of state for a while, getting help, starting over. That was enough for me. I never saw her again. I didn't expect to, but every time I drive that stretch of road now, especially at night, I think about her, about what could have happened if I hadn't stopped. I wonder how many other people he might have hurt before someone else finally stepped in. There's no part of this story that feels like it belongs in a horror movie, not the kind with monsters or shadows with glowing eyes, but it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Not because of some ghost in the trees, but because it was real. Because a person can be hunted through the woods like an animal by someone who once claimed to love them. People always talk about instincts: fight, flight, freeze. I don't know which one saved her, but I know mine kicked in when I stopped the car. I'm glad it did. I'm glad I didn't just keep driving. Not everyone gets away. She did. That's what matters. And now, every time I lock my door at night, I think about how fragile that line is between normal life and nightmare. 1 mile, 1 minute, one choice. It was enough. I don't talk about this much, not because I'm afraid of being called crazy or anything like that, but because I still can't really explain what happened. It was just something I lived through, something that changed the way I see everything. It happened about 6 years ago, and every time I go out into the woods now, I feel it hanging over me, like the woods are watching back. It was early fall when I took the trip. The leaves were just starting to turn, but the forest still had that thick, late summer green in most places. I had a long weekend and needed a break from everything: work, people, phones. I've always found peace in being alone deep in the woods, the kind of quiet you can only get miles from the nearest paved road. I picked a spot up in northern Pennsylvania, real remote. You wouldn't find it on any popular hiking blogs or trail maps. It wasn't an official campground or anything, just a patch of forest I'd marked on an old topographic map years ago. I parked my truck down a washed-out gravel road that ended in a thicket of overgrowth and pine. From there, I packed up my gear and hiked in. I didn't take a trail, just used my compass and went by feel. That's how I've always liked it. Cutting through the brush, stepping over logs, getting dirt on my boots. Real backwoods stuff. I figured I'd go maybe 5 miles in, find a good flat spot near a stream, and make camp for a few nights. Just me, the woods, and some quiet. First day went fine. I made good time, hit a shallow stream before dusk and set up my tent on a small rise nearby. Cooked some instant rice and tuna over a small stove and watched the sun dip through the trees. The air was crisp, smelled like damp leaves and earth. No bugs, no wind. Just that complete forest silence that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. I slept well that first night. No sounds outside the tent. Nothing moving. Not even the usual rustling from small animals or wind through the branches. It was dead quiet. I thought that was strange, but I didn't think much of it. Sometimes the woods are just still. Next morning, I made coffee and sat on a rock by the stream. I had no plans. Just wander around, fish a little, maybe nap in the sun. I crossed the stream and hiked uphill for an hour or so. That's when I saw something that didn't sit right. It was a tree, a big maple split clean down the center. The wood inside was fresh, like it had just happened, but there hadn't been any storms recently. The odd thing was that the split wasn't natural. The two halves had been pulled apart like something had forced its way through it. I looked around for signs of rot, lightning, even old tool marks. Nothing. The tree just looked ripped. I should have turned back then, honestly. But I didn't. I kept moving, thinking maybe I'd come across some weird natural formation or animal sign. The deeper I went, the more I noticed things that felt off. Stones stacked in odd piles, evenly spaced. Not big cairns, just little ones like someone had taken the time to balance 5 or 6 rocks on top of each other. They were scattered through a hollow I passed through, always in lines, always facing the same direction. I told myself it was probably some local thing. Hunters or hikers marking something, but I'd never seen signs like that before. Not here. Around noon, I stopped to eat, found a fallen log, opened my pack. That's when I heard the first sound. It was this low clicking, not an animal sound, not twigs snapping or leaves rustling. It was sharp, rhythmic. 3 clicks, pause, then 2 more. It was coming from uphill, maybe 50 yards into the trees. I froze, listening. Stopped for a while, then came again. Same pattern. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. I stayed still for a long time. I wasn't scared yet, just curious. Thought it might be woodpeckers, maybe some weird echo. Eventually, it stopped completely. I finished my lunch and started heading back toward camp. I didn't want to be too far out if it rained or if I lost the light, but the way back didn't feel right. I followed the stream, but things looked different. Trees I didn't remember, a steep gully I hadn't passed before. I knew I was headed the right way. My compass was solid, and I'd been keeping track of landmarks, but the forest seemed shifted. I started noticing that same clicking again. Closer this time, off to my left. Always the same pattern. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. I picked up my pace. Not running, but moving fast. I didn't stop for water or to check my bearings. I just wanted to be back at my tent. When I got there, it was just past 3. The sun was still up, but I didn't feel like myself. Like I just walked out of a bad dream. The camp looked untouched. My gear was where I'd left it, stove packed, sleeping bag still rolled up. I sat down and tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was all in my head. I'd gotten turned around, heard a bird or something. The woods play tricks on you when you're alone. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up every hour, listening. No wind, no bugs, no owls. Just silence. But around midnight, I heard the clicking again. It was right outside the tent. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe for a while. It wasn't loud. Just clear. Measured. Like someone flicking 2 rocks together, slowly. It circled the tent. I could hear it shifting through the leaves. Not fast, not sneaky. Just walking in slow circles. Clicking. It went on for hours. I never opened the tent. I didn't even reach for my knife. I just laid there, frozen. At some point, I passed out from exhaustion. When I woke up, it was dawn. The light was gray and cold. Everything looked normal again. I stepped out of the tent and checked around. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign of anything, but the forest still felt wrong. I packed up quickly. I didn't eat, didn't bother with coffee. I just threw everything in my pack and started hiking back toward the truck. This time, the forest felt like it was watching. I know how that sounds, but that's the only way I can explain it. Every sound was too close. Every squirrel, every crow felt like it was warning me. About an hour into the hike back, I noticed something that stopped me cold. My boot prints. I'd been walking in a straight line, following my compass. But in a soft patch of mud, I saw my own boot prints heading in the same direction. The exact same tread, same size, but they weren't mine from earlier. They were too fresh. No rain, no disturbance. Someone had been walking the same path, just ahead of me. I stopped, crouched down, looked around. No sounds, no movement. I decided to cut west, away from the path I'd taken in. It would take longer, but I didn't want to follow those prints or lead someone else to my truck. As I bushwhacked through thick undergrowth, I came across something that made my stomach drop. It was a shirt, torn, sun-bleached, tangled in a thorn bush. I pulled it out with a stick. There was dried blood on the collar and sleeves. No ID, no tags, just a plain gray work shirt. I left it, kept moving. An hour later, I heard the clicking again. This time it was far off, but I couldn't tell which direction. It echoed strangely, like it was bouncing off the trees. I started jogging. I wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. I just wanted out. I don't know how long I kept going. The forest felt endless. Every time I thought I recognized a ridge or a bend in the stream, it turned out to be something different. I started getting paranoid, kept checking over my shoulder, started thinking I was being followed, even though I couldn't hear anything. Then I found the second thing, a trail cam. It was strapped to a tree, half hidden under moss and bark. Looked like it had been there for years, but the batteries were still in it. I opened the compartment. No SD card, just empty. What really got me, though, was the carving in the tree next to it. Someone had scratched lines into the bark. 5 vertical slashes crossed by a 6th. A tally mark. 1 set. I started running. I finally reached the gravel road just before sunset. I don't know how I got turned around or how I ended up there. I must have walked in a circle or a big arc somehow. My truck was maybe 200 yards up the road. I sprinted the last bit, jumped in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, staring into the woods. The trees looked calm again, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. On the drive out, I passed a rusted-out van on the side of the road. It looked like it had been there for years. Flat tires, vines growing through the grill. But the rear doors were open, and there were deep scratches on the inside walls. I didn't stop. I never went back. I reported what I saw, the shirt, the trail cam, the weird signs, to a ranger station about 20 miles south. The guy there took notes but didn't seem surprised. Just told me not to go off trail in that area again. He didn't ask many questions. I've been in a lot of forests since then, camped all over the country, but I don't go off trail like I used to. I stick to marked paths,